told me if they ever found out what we were doing, he and I would go to jail for the rest of our lives.
Secrets will eat you up. You feel so alone.
I want to be able to speak the truth as loud as I had to speak the lie.
That was a clip from the highly anticipated and much controversialized documentary Leaving Neverland. It premieres soon on HBO, and in it, two men allege that they experienced years of sexual abuse at the hands of pop icon Michael Jackson. The film premiered at Sundance, has been receiving tons of attention since then, and we will get it actually Sunday, part 1 on HBO. Joining me now to talk through it is film critic Scott Mantz. Scott, your work appears on Collider, multiple other outlets. Been doing this for a long time, so I'm so glad that you're here.
Thank you so much for having me, Lauren. It's great to be here.
So, Scott, we really wanted to bring you in particular in and talk to you about it because you were there at Sundance when this movie premiered.
That's right.
And we were hearing reports come out just of that screening because, first of all, it's 4 hours, right? So
That's
you
right.
guys sat and you watched all 4 hours of it.
That's right. It was a 4-hour, two-part documentary. In between parts 1 and 2, we had a 10-minute break. And, you know, 10 minutes is not a lot of time to absorb everything that we saw in that those first 2 hours. And before the screening, you know, going into the theater, the world-famous Egyptian theater at the top of Main Street, we went through security. We had everything checked, all our pockets, our bags, everything. And then John Cooper, who's the director of the Sundance Film Festival, made an announcement after 18 years of going to Sundance. Never saw this before. He says, we have medical technicians on hand. If anyone here, counselors who will help you if you're disturbed a bit much by what you're about to see. So watching the first 2 parts, watching John Safechuck and then Wade Robson talk about their alleged, that is the key word here throughout this whole conversation, the word alleged, whether it's said or not, it is always alleged. Talk about the years of alleged sexual abuse. So what got me watching this first part was the pattern. John Safechuck tells his story about how Michael Jackson took him under his wing, became his friend, became a friend of the family. The trust was there. Then the touchy-feely got a little more invasive, then a lot more invasive, and then the rest of the family was kind of pushed aside. And then Wade Robson, who's a world-famous choreographer for Britney Spears, he tells his story. So here's what got me, Lauren. The patterns of both stories were virtually identical. The patterns were the same. And I just went, unless they corroborated, which I doubt, but maybe they did, the stories were so similar. How do you dispute the fact that these stories are similar? So after the first 2 hours, when we had the break, I thought, wow, I've really seen a lot. We've all seen a lot just now. What could they possibly do in these next 2 hours? Well, let me tell you something. The aftermath is more disturbing and upsetting than what we just saw, because the impact on their families, on their parents splitting up, on their siblings just breaking down in tears at the way Michael Jackson, this whole experience with him, destroyed their families. And now John Safechuck and Wade Robson are fathers. So now they're sort of wrapping their heads around the impact of what really happened to them, because they're thinking, if this happened to my kid, what would I do? So Wade Robson's really this big story here, because he testified in 2005, right?
Right. He's had some ups and downs with the court situation with him and the Jackson family.
Exactly. And he, in 2005, testified on behalf of Jackson, said that nothing happened, in so many words. So now, Lauren, why is he suddenly doing an about-face saying all this stuff happened? You testified under oath that nothing happened. So, of course, people are going to say, you're a liar, you're in it for the money, all this stuff. But what I understood, especially in the Q&A with John and Wade after the screening, what made me understand why he lied under oath, and I felt like, yes, he was telling his truth. His truth now was that he wasn't ready to accept that what happened to him was indeed sexual abuse. You know what I mean?
Yeah, can I ask you, Scott? I mean, because that was, we're seeing film critics like yourself tweet about the screening from Sundance and what you guys had seen and about the counselors. I mean, I don't want to get into the specifics of what is said, but how detailed do these two get in terms of what they say happened to them? Because, I know their thought was, let's bring in counselors in case people in the audience are triggered by their own experiences. How detailed do they get with these allegations?
Very. As detailed as you think it gets even deeper and more graphic. And again, the patterns of the detail in which both of these guys talk about the alleged abuse was identical. It was identical. Now, I was 12 years old, 13 years old when Thriller came out. So between Thriller in 1982 and Bad in 1987, Michael Jackson was at the peak of his creative and popularity. He was at the top between those 5 years. So I liked Michael Jackson's music just like most people did. I wasn't a diehard fan, but I loved the music. Whenever I worked out, I would listen to Thriller, I would listen to Bad. And just over the years, like when he started hanging out with young guys like, Macaulay Culkin, I started thinking, okay, that's all right. Maybe just because he was robbed of his own childhood because of the fame and because his own father was very, very difficult on his family. So now he's like living out his childhood as a grown-up. Okay. All right, okay, fine. But he's, also hanging out with a chimpanzee, a little weird, but okay, fine. But hearing the testimony, hearing the detailed, almost like the disturbing detail in which these guys go into, and the way they both went into it was, again, it was so similar that it was convincing testimony on their behalf. I was watching this film, and I was thinking, wow, I was kind of convinced.
Interesting. Well, and, there has been controversy because, look, the Jackson family went on CBS this morning, spoke to Gayle King and said that they believe these guys are after money. And I'm sure that family has dealt with people coming after Jackson's estate over the years, of course. But that's his brothers and one of his nephews went on and said that. They also have said, alleged that HBO is violating a legal agreement by letting this documentary play. HBO is standing behind it, saying we're going to air it.
That's right.
So the back and forth is happening for sure. I know the accusers are also going to speak with Gayle King and talk more about their side of the story. But that is kind of the question, is what will people who watch this take away from it? It was interesting. I thought it to me that they said, and the director kind of stood behind it, they said, well, we were never reached out to by the director about this documentary. And he said, well, I wanted these accusers to tell their story. But I will say, journalistically, to me, due diligence is you do reach out and you say, well,
Certainly.
what do you want to say?
Certainly.
And now they've given their statement and they say that it's all lies, the Jackson family does. And I guess we're going to see in this back and forth when it airs. When you walked out of the screening for that 10 minutes, did you have a chance to just speak to other critics, and was everyone having a similar reaction to
in between the two parts, there wasn't a whole lot of time. Even after the second part, I think we were all just, whoa, we were just speechless. It was a lot to absorb, and I certainly felt like I needed to absorb it. I posted 2 tweets, one after the first part, one after the second part, but then I just really felt like I needed to process everything I heard because, again, this is almost 4 hours. And again, I felt like the second part 2, the impact and the aftermath, these guys are grown up. Psychologically, they are messed up for life because of what they say happened to them, allegedly. But they're messed up. Like, how do you go through what you went through and not be impacted by that? That was the part that was more disturbing to me than hearing their accounts of the alleged abuse itself, is looking at these grown-ups who for the rest of their lives, their wives and now their kids are going to deal with the psychological impact of what they say happened to him. That is a lifelong thing, and that's more disturbing and upsetting and devastating than anything.
When you were at that Q&A with the two of them, how emotional did that get for them? I mean, that was, I think, the first time they had experienced getting questions from an audience, of course, after seeing that movie. What was that Q&A like, and what sense did you get from them and their answers to everybody's questions?
Well, the most of the questions, the biggest questions were directed to Wade, because, again, he was the one who actually went on the record in 2005. Like, why didn't you say what you said now? Why didn't you say that back then? Why? This guy who was testifying in that he was abused in 2005, like, you could have been there for him. You could have supported him. And he said, I will always regret not not coming forth, but I wasn't ready. And this is what got me more than actually watching the documentary itself. Watching him during the Q&A when he said, I just wasn't ready to accept that I had been sexually abused. Both of these guys, watching the documentary, the Q&A, and then their interview with Gayle King, you see that even though they are saying what happened was in fact sexual abuse, what you're also seeing, especially during the documentary that you'll see on HBO, is that they care about Michael Jackson. They love him as a person. They were fans. Like, here's the biggest star in the world showing them undivided attention. Who wouldn't be seduced? What family wouldn't be seduced by, oh my God, Michael Jackson is giving me all this attention? And he brought the kids in, he brought the families in, and he slowly tried to push the families out. And when these young men got older, Michael Jackson moved on to the next young kid, the one who did testify in 2005. And then, Macaulay Culkin. I really thought, Lauren, if you want to be, I'm going to be honest here. After the first documentary, the first part, the break in between, I thought, what if we came back in part 2, had an interview with Macaulay Culkin?
You were wondering.
That didn't happen.
Yeah. Okay.
In fact, there's no spoiler alert, but to talk about the film here, there was a title card saying that Macaulay Culkin refused to be interviewed and still stands by that nothing ever happened with Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
But listen, there's a lot more to this than where there is smoke, there is fire. And if you are able to wrap your head around Wade's defense of not telling the truth in 2005, but telling his truth now, keywords are his truth, because it's all alleged, and you can understand why this is a lifelong thing, the biggest star in the world, this relationship that he had. And you know what? Wow, that I was abused. He wasn't able to admit that in 2005.
What is the relationship between these two accusers like now? Did they ever address if they had met each other before the documentary? If they have, told each other their stories now and talked through it now? And I would imagine we don't see them on film together.
You don't see them on film together.
Okay.
That's why it was very jarring, Lauren, to be there in the Egyptian theater after this movie and to see them on stage with director Dan Reed. That was jarring. And that made me think, because I was thinking back to the similarities of the patterns. Did they corroborate?
Yeah.
Were they? I have not seen anywhere that they had actually met before they were interviewed for the documentary.
Okay.
So that is actually a question that someone at some point should ask, is did Wade Robson and did John Safechuck meet before they were interviewed by Dan Reed for the documentary to sort of get their ducks in a row? I'd be very curious to know if that in fact happened, because if they did, that changes the scope of what we see in the documentary.
Well, and we're seeing, interviews with their families as well. Did Dan Reed talk about the hours he spent on this, the research, the time that went into making all this?
I don't know for sure how much time he spent, whether it was over a year or whatever, but in the documentary footage that you see with the interviews with each person, they're wearing the same clothes. It's not like, they're wearing, 3 sets of clothes and they were interviewed.
Probably a couple big sit-downs.
Yeah, a couple big sit-downs.
And do you hear from anyone from Jackson's camp, whether that be people who said they were friends or business associates or anything? It's just all these
It's
families.
just these two guys. And that's the biggest criticism. And I want to go back to something you said earlier, because you're right. Due diligence. Reach out, at least have someone from the Jackson camp on camera to say, it's not true, so that you could say, well, we asked, this was their answer.
Right.
But the flip side to that is that Dan Reed has been saying, this is not the Jackson story. The story is not about Michael Jackson. The story is about Wade Robson. The story is about John Safechuck. These are their stories, and this is the stories they're telling. And then you have their family members, their mothers, weigh in. And, in both cases, their mothers are like, oh, my God, Michael Jackson is, coming over our house.
Right.
Hanging out,
They
telling
talk
us
about
stories.
that experience and how awestruck they probably were.
Awestruck, starstruck. And they're also, and this is key here, Lauren, they're being taken around the world on tour, given the royal treatment, going to Vegas, going to Hawaii. And then, okay, well, hey, Mom, can I sleep with Michael Jackson in his bed tonight? And the mothers are like, well, I don't know about this, but and I'm in the next room, and he's Michael Jackson. What's he going to do to my kid? Well, in both cases, the mother showed enormous regret. How could I not have known better. How could I'm ashamed, this is their words, that they were ashamed that they let this happen, that they weren't smart enough to see through the gloss of it, the fame of it, to realize that what was happening here was not cool.
So we're going to get the first 2 hours on Sunday, and then the next 2 hours, I think, the following Sunday on HBO. It'll be interesting to see what the reaction is. I would imagine people will, just like you guys did when you saw that screening, take to Twitter, share their thoughts and experiences. Scott Mantz, film critic extraordinaire of Collider. Check out his work, guys. Follow him on social media if you do not already. Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Lauren.
Thank you for your insight. Thank you.